Hi, Dr. Scott Beyer here, and today we're going to talk a little bit about how the health of your gut can impact or really magnify symptoms of chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia. Now, they're finding more and more about how the health of this can impact not only the health of our brain, but the rest of our body. And when it comes to those with fibromyalgia, there are two primary reasons. It's not the only two, but two primary reasons on really how our gut health can impact or really magnify symptoms of fibromyalgia. And the first one, well, before I get into that, those with fibromyalgia, they found a very, very close association between those who've been diagnosed, and they also fit the criteria to also be diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome. So what's interesting is they also found that in certain studies, around 70% of individuals who were diagnosed with fibromyalgia had something called leaky gut. And long story short, what leaky gut contributes to is it contributes to chronic low-grade levels of immune system activation or inflammation, okay? Now, how does this affect our body? Well, inflammation, what it does peripherally, like at the site of joint injury, is it sensitizes all of our pain fibers there. And that's why a lot of people, they'll turn towards like anti-inflammatories to help take an edge off. These are things like, ibuprofen, Tylenol, Aleve, Advil, prednisone. Those work in some individuals because they lower levels of inflammation and decrease those pain fibers. Now, the other thing that leaky gut contributes to, or inflammation contributes to, is really poor brain function. So one of the more common symptoms that we see with leaky gut is first and foremost brain fog, fatigue, okay, GI-related symptoms, pain, okay, and then sleep-related issues. And a lot of those struggling with fibromyalgia have those very same symptoms. Now, when it comes to our brain, the majority of what makes up the mass of our brain you would think would be neurons, but it's actually not. Around 85% of our brain, what takes up the mass of our brain, are these things called glial cells. And one of those glial cells are things called microglia, okay? So 85% of our brain is like these immune system cells called glial cells, and the other 15% are actual neurons. So for every one neuron that you have, we've got like 9 or 10 glial cells surrounding it. And these glial cells are very, very sensitive to levels of inflammation. So when our immune system is active and when we're a little bit more inflamed, what does that do for the neuron? Well, it creates a lot of neuronal dysfiring. And in some areas of the brain can contribute a little bit more to fibromyalgia. What they say individuals who have fibromyalgia have are this thing called central sensitization to pain. In other words, the brain has learned to feel pain almost like in its normal state. And what they're also finding is abnormal activation of these immune system cells in the brain, so our body can't inhibit all of those pain fibers. So that's number one on how our gut can contribute or magnify symptoms of fibromyalgia. Now, number two is there is more and more research on saying the bacteria in our gut can influence the health of the rest of our body, and that statement is ever so true with individuals with fibromyalgia. Now, there was a study done where they looked at this thing called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And to kind of sum up what small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIBO, S-I-B-O is for short, is when it comes to our body has hundreds of trillions of different types of bacteria. And we have them on our skin, okay, but the majority of them should reside in our large intestine. That's this guy right here. Okay, well, before our large intestine, kind of in the middle here, we've got this thing called our small intestine. And our small intestine should be relatively barren of bacteria, because that's like we have about 15 to 20 feet of runway or small intestine to where we absorb about 90% of our nutrients. Okay, our nutrients from not only the vitamins that we're taking, but our nutrients from the food that we're eating. So what happens in people with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth is some of the bacteria that reside in the large intestine translocate and they start to grow in the small intestine. So what does that do to the 15 to 20 foot runway that we have to absorb the majority of our nutrients? Well, it shortens it. And now when we eat food, Now we're in direct competition with those bacteria as to who's going to absorb the nutrients first. And a lot of times those who have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, these are the people that will get like bloating after they eat, gas, abdominal pain, constipation or diarrhea, depending on what type of bacteria you have. But really what happens in those individuals is that we miss out, or we decrease the amount of absorption of those vitamins and minerals. Now when it comes to our cells, there's a very close association. If you remember from like 5th grade science class, there's this thing called the mitochondria. And the mitochondria need a lot of different nutrients in order to run properly. Things like B vitamins, things like magnesium, things like CoQ10, all of those things that are needed for the mitochondrial function. So these are very, very sensitive to nutritional deficiencies. Now, if the bacteria are eating or absorbing some of the nutrients before you can get to them, what does that do to the health of the mitochondria? Well, it goes down. And if the mitochondria, what they're responsible for doing is producing our energy. So if mitochondrial function goes down, what happens to our energy? Well, that goes down as well. What do people with fibromyalgia normally feel? Well, they feel a decrease in energy. And when we lose energy production from these mitochondria, it's not only going to make us feel fatigued, but this is energy production for everything in our body. Making new cells, making new structural proteins, making enzymes, making hormones, making certain neurotransmitters. All of that requires proper mitochondrial function. So they found a very close association not only between central sensitization in the brain, but also mitochondrial dysfunction in those with fibromyalgia. So if you guys found this interesting, we are always producing more videos, not just on fibromyalgia, but the health of our gut, the health of our brain, things like hormones. If you guys found this interesting, there's 2 places where you can actually read up on more. One of them is I, Brain and Body, so the letter I, and then brainandbody.com. The other one is you can search for Integrative Brain and Body on Facebook. We're always posting these videos. Hope you guys found this helpful. I'm Dr. Scott Beyer. Have a wonderful day.